Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Laureate of the 2022 Time Prize in Sustainable Development, and our host, Professor Liu Zhaohan. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to join us at the Laureate Lecture of 2022 Time Prize in Sustainable Development. I'm Angela Liu, your MC for today's event. To begin with, we would like to invite to the stage the host of this lecture, Professor Liu Zhaohan, academician of Academia Sinica, to give us the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Liu.
Professor Sachs, Mr. Sachs, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Laureate Lecture of the 2022 Time Prize in Sustainable Development. Professor Sachs, who is the laureate for this prize, is currently a professor in Columbia University. He received all his degrees from Harvard University in 1970s. And he taught at Harvard University for more than 20 years before he went to Columbia in 2002 as the director of the Earth Institute in Columbia. By the way, the National Central University in Taiwan, where I used to be the president, has been in the late 1990s worked together with Earth Institute on issues relating to global change and sustainable development. Professor Sachs is also the president of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solution Network, SDSN, which was established under the auspices of the then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Professor Sachs is well recognized in the world for his sharp observation and his innovative ways to solve complex problems. In the 2010, 2012, in that time frame, he worked very hard to help develop, design, and adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the Paris Climate Agreement, Paris Agreement for Climate. Those two are considered as the essential pillars for the world to achieve sustainable development. And Professor Sachs played a unique role in both. Unfortunately, since the adoption of the SDG and Paris Agreement, progress has been disappointingly slow, mainly because of lack of cooperation. Lack of cooperation within countries and among different nations. And this disappointed results are still continuing. Professor Sachs suggested that perhaps only through dialogue, meaningful dialogue, can we resolve the impasse and get cooperations to move towards sustainable development in the world. And in this talk, Professor Sachs will propose several innovative methods for enhanced dialogue to try to resolve this impasse and lead the countries, the world, towards sustainable development. It is interesting to note that dialogue is fundamental to the teachings of the two most revered sages in Chinese history, Confucius and Mencius, 孔子and 孟子. We all know that the basic format of the famous intellect of Confucius and the 7 chapters of Mencius, 论语 and 孟子7篇, the basic format is dialogue. They demonstrated how dialogue can actually lead to harmony and of human society. So let's welcome Professor Sachs for his Laureate lecture on dialogue and sustainable development. Professor Sachs.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu. Please take your seat. And let's now invite Professor Sachs to deliver his speech.
Professor Liu, thank you so much for your wise words and for the lovely introduction, and all my gratitude to the Tang Prize Foundation for the award and the opportunity to share with you my thoughts this morning about sustainable development and the state of the world today. I want to start with two observations by two very wise observers. One was, in a way, a guru of mine at Harvard University, Professor Edward Wilson, an evolutionary biologist who passed away last year. And he was a great thinker and a wonderful person. And he described our state of affairs in the 21st century in the following way. He said that we have entered the 21st century with our Stone Age emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technologies. So for Professor Wilson, what was our deep state of affairs was the absolute incongruity of the timing of our human nature, which was formed in evolutionary timescale over tens and hundreds of thousands of years, which formed our capacities both for cooperation and for violence. Our medieval institutions, such as the Constitution of the United States, very clever in 1787, not the way I would recommend writing it today. So it is a medieval institution, and it is not up to today's challenges, unfortunately. And, of course, our godlike technologies, because we are in an age of advances of technological know-how at an unprecedented rate, and probably at a still accelerating rate because of the continuing advances made possible by the computation and digital revolutions, of which Taiwan is so much a part. The second observation that is related is by my favorite president during my lifetime, indeed the only one that I've really liked, I have to say, and that's President John F. Kennedy, who said in his inaugural address on January 20th, 1961, "For the world is very different now. Man holds in his mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." So President Kennedy, I think, in one sentence described the existential reality of our time and was pointing in the same way as Professor Wilson, which is that our technological capacity is so vast, but our institutional and human capacities so limited that at the same time we could end all forms of human poverty, but also the same technological capacity could destroy life on the planet. And of course, at the time, he was referring to the risk of thermonuclear war, which, ironically, though he came to office completely determined to avert that came closest during his administration in October 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we're in the same state today as we were in October 1962, in a hot war between the US and Russia, the two largest nuclear powers. And believe me, this is a war between the US and Russia, not a proxy war even. This morning, as I watched the latest news, we had US airplanes providing intelligence for Ukrainian vessels to shoot missiles at Russian ships in the Black Sea. This is an active war in which the United States plays a direct military part, not just a supplier part. And this is how dangerous the world is. Two countries with 6,000 nuclear warheads in hot war right now. And this is what President Kennedy was warning about. Sustainable development is an idea to confront this reality. So sustainable development is an idea. It's a new idea. It has several facets that I would like to discuss, but it's an idea really that is effectively less than 40 years old. Dr. Brundtland's famous commission in 1987 brought the phrase to the public awareness, and the idea of sustainable development was adopted diplomatically at the Rio summit in 1992, where it was formally inscribed as a goal of the member states of the United Nations. Now, why did we come to the need for this? Why is the world the way that Professor Wilson and President Kennedy described? I think we need to start with the nature of the world system as it is today. There is a system that connects the operations of economics, politics, geopolitics, and so forth, that binds the whole world together in an interconnected, highly complex, and now very dangerous structure. And I would say that there are four key elements of the world system to keep in mind. First, it is Western dominated. And by West, I mean it is dominated by the countries of the North Atlantic region. That means the UK, the European Union, and the United States. And it is dominated by the West for a absolutely single twist of world history, and that is that industrialization came first to the North Atlantic region, specifically in the workshop of James Watt in University of Glasgow in the 1770s, when he added a condenser to Newcomen's steam engine and made the first modern effective steam engine. Now, China had invented the steam engine many centuries earlier, but it was Britain that brought the modern steam engine to life and then put the steam engine into transport, especially rail, and then ocean steamers, and into its navy, and made a Western-led world in the 19th century. We can date the arrival of the Western-led world between 1795 and 1839, because in 1795, King George III sent his emissary, George Macartney, to discuss opening of China with Emperor Qianlong. And Emperor Qianlong famously said, "We don't really need your goods, and please stick to the port of Canton." In 1839, after the steam engine had been put onto the British naval vessels, Britain launched the war against China, the First Opium War, and history was decisively changed. So it was British militarism that created the Western-led world. Britain was by far the most militaristic country of the 19th century, and it battered all the rest of the non-industrial world. The second fact of the world system is that it is capitalist. Capitalist does not mean free market or even market economics. It means that it operates for the benefit of private enterprises seeking profit. It's often state-led. In fact, it's a merger of state and private interests, but it is oriented towards private capital. And of course, it was the East India Company of Britain that colonized India, not the British Raj. The British Raj took over from the East India Company in 1858, but it was capitalism in its basic form, a private company, heavily intersected by the state because Queen Elizabeth owned shares, as did others in the East India Company. But the idea was private property and private capital, and that's how the world is organized till today. It has certain strong merits. It leads to a lot of human energy devoted towards accumulation of wealth because the profit motive is extraordinarily powerful as an incentive mechanism. But it means a world based on greed fundamentally, and a world in which political systems are generally oriented towards private wealth maximization. The United States runs on behalf of its private industry. The US government doesn't control industry, the US industry controls the state. And this is quite clear. It's not a radical proposition, it's a quite evident proposition, especially through campaign contributions that now total more than $10 billion each election cycle, and those are paid by the major corporate lobbies and the billionaires. So this is the second fact. It's a capitalist system. The third fact of our world system is that it is a nation-state system. The real power resides at the level of the nation-state, not at the global level, say with UN institutions, which I work with, which have no power at all, or at the local level. The power is at the national level because that's where the military is, that's where the security state is, and that's where the final power rests, especially with the few great powers of the world. And the fourth element of the world system is that it is a radically technology-driven system. We're in a state of non-stop technological change since James Watt and early mechanization based on steam power. And it's remarkable. It could end all forms of human poverty. We could have the most glorious prosperity ever imagined, even beyond what is imagining. But we could destroy the world at the same time with the same technologies, by the way, whether it's nuclear or energy or biotechnology or others, they each have a flip side to them. And we have laureates who have saved hundreds of millions or billions of people with the vaccines, but the same biotechnology can create biowarfare, and there's active biowarfare programs by countries around the world that are hidden from view, which I have seen quite a bit about in the last couple of years, and it's profoundly dangerous. So this is our state of affairs. Now, what results from this? What results is the greatest wealth that the world has ever known, the greatest longevity that the world has ever known, but three absolutely fundamental problems. Fundamental. First is that despite all of this wealth, there is persisting, profound poverty in the world. This is our most fundamental immorality. This poverty is not noticed. People live 20 or 30 years life expectancy less than in Taiwan or the United States, and it's not noticed how they die in mass numbers. Nobody in the rich world cares, virtually. in power, I should say. Many people care, but nobody in power cares. That's not their job. Their job is wealth and power. And I see this, and my wife sees this in our work in Africa. And a couple of days ago, there was a coup in Niger. I'll give you a technical term about that. Duh. And what I mean by duh is Niger is one of the poorest places in the world. Life expectancy is around 60 years. People die in mass numbers. Drought, hunger, poverty, lack of access to the most basic services. You wouldn't expect a coup in such places? Of course you would. That's why there are coups right across the Sahel. Nobody cares except that Niger provides uranium for France. So there will be armies all over. There will be new proxy wars in Niger, not because of the people who are completely invisible and expendable, but because of what the uranium might mean. So this is the first failing. We could end all forms of human poverty, but we don't do so. We don't even try. There isn't a glimmer in the US Congress of anybody that cares about this, just to tell you the truth. And I'm here to tell you the truth. I've been working on this for 40 years. Nobody cares. It's not their job description. Second is environmental catastrophe. Because the hundreds-fold, 2 orders of magnitude increase of economic activity since James Watt perfected the condenser, and based on fossil fuels, where their quantum effects of capturing infrared radiation were not understood or even conceivable in 1776, have led us to the brink of environmental catastrophe. And it's across the board catastrophe because the size of the world economy is so great at $100 trillion or more per year that we are impinging on every ecosystem, on the oceans, on the land, and of course on the climate. It's not just climate change. It's the destruction of every major biome in the world and every major fishery in the world because of the scale of the world economy and because of the technologies that are used. The scale only matters not because of the number of joules of electricity that are produced, but because it's produced with fossil fuel, because that's what creates the carbon dioxide that is warming the planet. We've now reached a planet that is warmer than at any time in the last 125,000 years since the Eemian period. We are already putting in place, inevitably, I would think, the destruction of a significant part of the West Antarctic ice sheet. And we are committing to several meters sea level rise over some time scale, whether it's decadal or century scale. We don't know. But my lead colleague in climate science, James Hansen, has been telling me for 20 years consistently right, that what the IPCC says, which is pretty alarmist, he says it's only a small part of the truth because it's the consensus view that is lagging behind the reality, and that the situation is worse than we know and it's accelerating. So warming has gone from 0.18 degrees per decade Celsius increase to now about 0.27 degrees Celsius increase. We will breach the 1.5 degree sea level shortly. The third major failing of the international system, of course, is that we are unable to sustain peace. This is a structural failing. in the Western mind, by the way, which is the Western mind that is based on the 1,000 years of European warfare, which was basically nonstop for 1,000 years, the state of war is viewed as inevitable. This is the sad truth. This is quite different from China's outlook, where for much of the last 2,000 years there was internal peace, albeit typically always threats of invasion from the north, but still long periods of internal peace. In Europe, there was no internal peace for the period since 476 AD, when the Western Roman Empire fell. After that, it was war just about all the time. And so even as we teach international relations in the US universities, it's about the inevitability of conflict. One of my, one of the analyst that I admire most in the United States, though I disagree with him basically, but he's a wonderful scholar and a wonderful human being, John Mearsheimer at University of Chicago, entitled his most famous book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. So the book is based on the idea that tragedy is the natural state of affairs, that there will be war because the international system is anarchic. And I say, John, how can we settle for tragedy? He said, Jeff, that's the reality. He's very smart, but I can't settle for a field which is based on tragedy, except maybe in literature, but not in our reality. And that's where sustainable development comes in. The idea of sustainable development is a problem-solving field. It is to address those three areas and say, no, we will end poverty, we can have economic well-being and environmental sustainability, and war is not inevitable. Not only is it not inevitable, it's unthinkable, should be unthinkable. It's, of course, by the way, not really unthinkable because it's the mainstream in the US right now, more war. Nobody talks about negotiating the end to the Ukraine war. If I say it, which I do every day, I'm called a Putin apologist. That's how bad the mindset is right now. So the idea of sustainable development is to say, no, we choose to end all forms of human poverty, not all forms of human life. It is a field with a goal. My favorite philosopher, Aristotle, believed in telos, that there should be an end purpose. And this is a field with a telos. The telos, the end purpose, is that there should be shared prosperity, environmental sustainability, and global peace, and that is within reach. And to get there, we should understand our Stone Age emotions and what we are prone to do, but then control the worst of them. We should understand and reform our medieval institutions because we don't want to die for medieval reasons. And we should harness our technologies for the human good, not for the US military or any other military, but for the human good. Is the ultimate purpose of the digital revolution to have smarter guided missiles? I don't think so. But that is the fastest area of technological advance over the last 6 months. Even on the battlefield in Ukraine, they're testing their new weapons. They just happen to fall on Ukrainians. So this field of sustainable development is three things. First, it is a set of goals, as I've just described them. So it is a goal-oriented discipline. And specifically, we can think about the globally agreed goals, 17 Sustainable Development Goals agreed on September 25th, 2015, the Paris Agreement agreed on December 12, 2015, and the new agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, agreed under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. These are globally agreed objectives. They are good objectives. They would save the world. Note that in the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 16 calls for peaceful and inclusive societies. SDG 17 calls for global partnership. Incidentally, 5 countries, let me put it a different way, 188 member states of the UN have put forward SDG plans of action. 188. 5 have not. Which 5? South Sudan, Yemen, Haiti, Myanmar, and the United States of America. Notice the company. Because for the US, the goal of the world is power. It is not sustainable development. And they can't even bring themselves yet to acknowledge the Sustainable Development Goals as a national policy to this moment, 8 years after they were adopted. Second, sustainable development is a field of study. It's a systems approach, but a system of systems. In other words, you have to know about the interconnections of 4 main systems. First, the Earth physical systems to understand the ecological, climatological, hydrological challenges. Second is the world engineered systems. We live in an engineered world. By and large, I say, thank goodness. That's why we eat, have clean water, have sanitation, why we in the developed world, like we are, don't worry about our food or our water day by day, though 2 billion people do every single day desperately, but we don't have to because of the engineered world. We live in a world that is engineered for water, for sanitation, for road transport, for rail, for fiber. And that's the second systems world that needs to be understood, the engineered systems. The third systems are the political economic systems. And those are the systems of power and allocation of resources. Markets play a role, and brute power plays a role. And in our textbooks, we talk about markets, but not brute power, because we're not supposed to expose the darker side of capitalism. But it's a darker side very much as well. And the fourth system is the social, psychological, ethical, cultural systems. And these are the ways we think, the ways we perceive reality, and the ways that groups relate to each other than through the power structures of politics. And sustainable development aims to interconnect those. It's not easy. It's very hard to master any one area. Of course, nobody can master all of these interconnected systems, but the idea is to understand that we live in an interconnected world, a system of systems. I initiated a PhD in sustainable development at Columbia University in 2005. And I was asked, what's the definition of sustainable development? And I said, if you can please an advisor in the physical sciences or engineering on the one side, and an advisor in the social sciences on the other side, you're in sustainable development. So the idea is two different ways of approaching the world: the material, physical, the social, political, economic, and ethical. And these need to be understood in an integrated way. And I said, your PhD has to be approved by subject experts in these different disciplines. And we're getting wonderful PhDs out of this on approaches of sustaining ecosystems, or ending poverty in low-income settings, or relations with indigenous populations, or climate damages, and so forth. But it is looking at the interconnectedness of the physical, the engineered, the economic, political, and social environments that is at the essence of the disciplinary studies of sustainable development. And the third aspect of sustainable development, the goals, the discipline, is the new ways of governance. So this is an action-oriented discipline. It is theory and praxis. And the practice is essential, partly because we are absolutely time limited in what we are doing right now in several ways. First, we have run out of ecological buffer zone. We're just at the tipping points where we can have runaway environmental disaster in several ways. I don't have time to elaborate, but again, the lead climate scientist at the Earth Institute for many years, Wallace Broecker, who passed away, an absolutely brilliant climatologist and oceanographer, and James Hansen, emphasized to their hundreds of colleagues, the point is the nonlinearities and the threshold effects of our climate system, whether it's the destruction of the ice sheets, the collapse of the thermohaline circulation, the drying of the rainforests, the melting of the permafrost. We're just there right now. This becomes irreversible. Our job, as we were discussing earlier, is to be good ancestors for our descendants. But we're going to leave them with a completely wrecked world unless we act now. So the time is very short. The other time scale that's very short is the nuclear threshold. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists keeps the doomsday clock. It is now at 90 seconds to midnight, meaning that we are closer, according to the atomic scientists, to destruction of the world than at any time since the clock started in 1947. And I can see it because the people that run my country are completely without accountability and prudence. And they are engaged in a hot war with another nuclear power in a game of chicken, which is absolutely disgusting. And this is a big problem because they don't answer phone calls either. They don't want to hear about it. The mass media don't want to hear about it. It's impolite to talk about nuclear threats. All we're told is, don't be afraid. Well, my advice is be afraid. Because we are not in control. And we are not in responsible hands, I'm afraid to say. So this is another reason why time is so short. We've been setting the goals now since 1972 with the first Stockholm Summit, then at the Rio Summit, then in the year 2000 at the Millennium Summit, then in the year 2015. These are wonderful goals. I've been involved for 23 years in the goal making, not before that in an active way, but since the Millennium Development Goals. I love the goals, but we're not achieving them. Absolutely not achieving them. We state them, we adopt them, and then we don't pursue them. Let me say that there's a lot to study on this, so if there are PhD students listening in or undergraduate students listening in, solutions are based on knowledge and expertise. These are not simple subjects. I'm not arguing that it's merely a matter of ethics or good faith to solve these problems. Transforming the energy system by 2050 is a very deep technical challenge, not only an ethical challenge, not only a political challenge, but a technical set of challenges as well. How to make a renewable energy system work, how to make nuclear power safe, how to engage a value chain for electric vehicles that can fit the scale of the world challenge, how to have low-cost energy storage, and so on and so forth. These are big technical challenges. That's what the discipline of sustainable development analyzes. But because time is short, let me close with the governance issues, because this is where our biggest challenges, in fact, lie. The world has been governed by Anglo-Saxon precepts for the last 200 years. That's a very particular corner of the world, very strange philosophically, and not such a good idea. But the British empiricist idea was, let desire run strongly, but control it by markets or by political institutions. So Hobbes said, Thomas Hobbes, the British philosopher of the 1600s, said, people are incorrigible in their insatiable appetites for power and glory and fame, so we need a strong central government to control them. Don't try to change people, just control them. Adam Smith came along in 1776 and said, people are driven by self-interest, but market forces and competition will be the vehicle to turn self-interest into social interest. And the system that will emerge of a self-governing marketplace is providentially going to lead to the common good. Alas, these are nice fictions, clever ideas, but not reality. Because we don't survive with leviathans like Hobbes saw, and because the free market is not a providential system. It never existed. We need government, but we need government doing the right things, not the wrong things. And government not simply a handmaiden of profit-seeking, whether it's the military-industrial complex in the United States, which basically owns and operates foreign policy of the United States right now. So look to Raytheon rather than the White House to understand the real dynamics of U.S. foreign policy. Or whether it is in any other sphere, we need government that works for the common good, not government that works for particular private interests. And governance for sustainable development is not easy. It's also technically challenging. Think about the energy transformation. Because we've already reached 1.2 and will soon be perhaps this year or next year even at an anomaly of 1.4 degrees C above the pre-industrial level because of this huge hot year that we're having because of the El Nino, amplifying or leading to an interannual variability on top of the rising underlying trend. We urgently need to have zero carbon energy systems by mid-century. Now, that's a governance challenge. Does Taiwan have such a plan? Not at all. No plan at all. 50-30-20 is no plan at all. It's not even an excuse for a plan. The goal is to get to zero. 50% electricity from coal and from natural gas and 30 from coal is an 80% fossil fuel system for 2025. It makes no sense. It's not even an objective. It's a statement. So where is the plan? Well, your government and my government have made no plans because they're making politics, short-term thinking. They don't want to lay out the alternatives. Should there be nuclear power here? It's been debated heatedly. Okay, here's a scenario with nuclear power. Here's a scenario without nuclear power. But at least these two scenarios get to net zero by 2050. Has the government proposed such a scenario? No, not that I know of. Excuse me if I'm wrong. But I can tell you, Taiwan's not alone. The United States has no plan at all. What we have is a Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee chaired by a senator who owns 2 coal companies. You can't make this up. And I'm not being satirical. I'm talking about Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. His family wealth depends on coal. His job in the Senate is to prevent any plan. But since the whole Congress is corrupt in the United States, I don't mean individual corruption, I mean the whole system is corrupt because they all depend on corporate contributions to keep their office. Even having a senator owning 2 coal companies in this day and age doesn't even raise an eyebrow. And recently, there was almost a sting or joke operation where I think it was Greenpeace interviewed the top lobbyist of ExxonMobil, pretending to be offering a new job for this lobbyist. And so he asked the lobbyist, how do you operate? And he said, oh, it's easy. All we do is go to Senator Joe Manchin. He stops everything. And when this came out, it didn't even make news because the quality of governance is in a state of disrepair. It's a formalism of democracy that there is an election. That's all. Otherwise, there is no deliberation, no information, no truth-telling on whether it's the war in Ukraine where the American people haven't been asked one thing or told one thing from the start, or on a climate plan or any other area. So governance needs long-term planning. That's the starting point. Incidentally, I know it will not be so popular to say here, but I will say it. The Mainland National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC, the planning agency, does long-term planning. This is what governments need. Not to eliminate markets, of course, but to have a planning structure for public infrastructure and for regulation within which markets can operate. Governments need clear goals and instruments to achieve the goals, not just winning elections. We have none of that in the United States right now. In no areas of public policy, we have not solved one public policy problem in the United States in decades. Everything's blocked. A second part of governance that is essential is regional cooperation. No economy can achieve sustainable development on its own. Not an island economy, not a terrestrial economy. No economy can achieve sustainable development on its own. Even mainland China, a continental scale economy, cannot achieve sustainable development on its own. It needs the wind and the solar energy of the Gobi Desert, for sure. We need cooperation within regions. That is the opposite of the Cold War strategy. The most ancient strategy of empire is divide et impera, divide and conquer. The United States aims at division within regions of the world rather than helping regions to unite around common purposes. In my view, the right level of regional aggregation for East Asia is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, because this brings together China, Japan, Korea, the 10 ASEAN countries, Australia, and New Zealand. And with that aggregation, you have a mix of primary energy sources that could fuel this vast central region of the world economy. Australia has so much desert, it could provide through a submarine cable vast amounts of electricity to Indonesia, as well as green hydrogen. So it should be part of the mix. We need regional cooperation at that scale. But are we getting it? No, we're getting the opposite. When I was in Tokyo a few days ago, cooperate with China on energy? Would the US even allow it? This is really the question. Of course, let me say, by the way, that if the East Asian countries figured out, if we were united, we would be the most dynamic, prosperous, safe, leading part of the whole world. So why are places 10,000 miles away telling us differently? That would be wisdom. Because this is a region that would absolutely lead the world in sustainable development. You have everything here to achieve it. All the technological know-how, the active markets, the high saving rates, the ability to produce low-cost infrastructure, everything is here. This place would lead the world, inspire the world, and also provide the technology for the rest of the world. So please do it. But that requires regional cooperation as a central feature. Finally, let me turn to global cooperation. We had 200 years of an anomalous Western-led world. If one looks throughout world history, temporary shifts of relative power lead to temporary advantages, which typically spill out as imperial wars that after a period of 200 or 300 years run their course. The Western world dominated because of a set of technologies that were commercialized first in England, actually in Britain, to be more precise, because it was in Scotland where the steam engine was really improved most dramatically. And that led to 200 years of Western and especially Anglo-Saxon-led world development. Britain ran much of the world until the early 20th century, and then 2 world wars ended the British Empire. The baton was passed to the United States, which imagined itself the new world leader and was, in effect, for some decades. But that advantage has run its course because now technology is well understood. In China, it's well understood. In India, it is spreading rapidly all over the world. There is no such thing anymore as a Western-led world. The only kind of world we can have peacefully is a multipolar world in which there is peaceful cooperation within each region, and the various regions are cooperating with each other. East Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, Western Asia, Western Europe, North America, South America, Africa. That's the kind of world that we need, where neighbors are making integrated energy and ecological systems, managing riversheds together, interconnecting renewable energy together, and peacefully trading and interconnecting with the rest of the world. There are two great ways to do this. One is noting that it's in everybody's self-interest to have that kind of peaceful cooperation. And the Silk Routes are the greatest historical exemplar of that over a 2,000-year period. Because trade between the Roman Empire and the Han Empire, trade during Marco Polo's period, trade actually in the 15th and 16th centuries between China and the West was a boon to the whole world. And that's why I very much admire China's Belt and Road Initiative as a very positive contribution to interconnecting the world. Of course, the United States, which is not part of Eurasia, immediately said, that's a terrible program. And it presses the Europeans to say, that's terrible. But the Europeans and China are the two ends of the Eurasian landmass that should be interconnecting with each other. So this is one part. The second part is, as Professor Liu said, dialogue, understanding, talking with each other. This is so basic, but so much neglected. If I could say, and I know I'm running out of time, so I apologize, just my favorite result of game theory. In The Prisoner's Dilemma, two people or two agents or two sides have a reason to cooperate, but they have an incentive to cheat. And game theory predicts, now this is Anglo-Saxon theory, predicts that both sides will cheat. If Confucius and Mencius were playing with each other, they would not cheat, I assure you. Because Confucius would say, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. And they would behave like gentlemen, Ren, Li, and we would have a wonderful cooperative outcome. But in Western thought, you cheat. That's even called the equilibrium. That's a strange thing to teach our students. But here's the truth. When two people play in experimental game theory, they cooperate about half the time. Except if they're economic students, then they don't cooperate because they have a trained incapacity. They've learned that cheating is rational. If they are nurses, they cooperate about 90% of the time. But here's the beauty. If you let the two sides talk with each other, not to make a binding agreement, just to chat, what's called cheap talk in economics, cooperation goes above 90% because something is triggered in that Stone Age emotional mechanism in the amygdala linked to the prefrontal cortex that says, I can cooperate with that person. And cooperation rises to nearly complete level. Dialogue matters. So in that context, how many times have President Biden and President Putin spoken since Russia launched the special military operation on February 24th, 2022? That would be zero. Because dialogue is viewed as a bad thing in the United States. It's called appeasement. Why discuss with the other side? And if you take that view, you end up with Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos PDR, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Serbia, Libya, Ukraine. If you don't talk to the other side, you fight with the other side. This is ancient Chinese wisdom. And what I especially love about the Tang Prize and the Tang Prize Foundation is not only its vision for a better world and its interconnectedness and its championing the new discipline of sustainable development, but also urging us to look to ancient wisdom to solve our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Professor Sachs. Thank you. Please take your seat. And now we would like to invite back to the stage Professor Liu to give us the conclusion.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for delivering this lecture of wisdom and courage. Thank you very much. Professor Sachs started his lecture by quoting Professor Wilson and President Kennedy's words, essentially talking about the worry about the technological capacity of the world was or still is overwhelming the human capacity. And that's worrisome. And he continued to talk about the current crisis, could be of our society, things like the West-dominated industrial revolution leading to capitalism, and then the current technology dominated whole world. And then he went on to say that maybe sustainable development is the solution. And he essentially talked to us about his idea of a goal-oriented solution for the problem, and also a systems approach to solve the problem. And he proposed a systems approach in areas like first systematically understand the physical system, and also the engineering system. He talked about also to understand the political economic system as well as the ethical system. And only through the thorough understanding of these four systems and the combination of the physical and engineering aspects with the social science, political, and ethical aspect, can one really have a sustainable development-based solution. And then he emphasized there's a very strong component, essential component on this solution, which is new ways of governance. Governments, well, he said, government should work for the common good. Government is there to serve the people. And then he then urged the government to have long-range plans. And also, he emphasized that cooperation, regional cooperation, as well as global cooperation are so essential to solving all these problems. And actually, he hoped and he urged the East Asian countries should get together to work together, and he is expecting that collaboration can really be the solution or to be our hope for the world to move toward sustainable development. Thank you, Professor Sachs, for giving us some hope and urging Taiwan, East Asian countries to work together toward peace and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Liu. Thank you. And thank you once again to our laureate, Professor Sachs. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the Laureate Lecture for Sustainable Development. Thank you for joining us this morning. Please don't forget your personal belongings as you leave, and we wish you a good day. 各位来宾，第5届唐奖得奖人演讲永续发展场到这边圆满的告一个段落，非常感谢您的参与，也希望大家都有满满的收获。离场的时候，请记得您随身携带的物品，同时请记得归还您所借取的同步口译接收器，取回您的证件。祝福您平安顺心，谢谢。